And welcome to this week's episode of Hashtag Leadership, What's on Your Mind. Remember, we're a podcast to make you stop and think about your leadership journey, and we're going to add value as much as we can by speaking to amazing guests with amazing stories and experts in their field. So if you haven't already, make sure you hit subscribe on the YouTube channel and make sure you follow us on your podcast provider. So I'm really excited today. We're speaking to Mark. How are you doing, sir?
Very good. Good to see you, Stuart. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, that's what I've only recently met Mark, and we've got a mutual friend, and you've been on a podcast, and you're local, so I thought I've got to have you on. You've got real credibility and lots of experience in the field that you come from. So without going into too much detail, I'm going to get you to introduce yourself. So as I hit the 20-minute timer, can you just introduce yourself for the people who don't know who you are and tell us a little bit about where you come from and obviously why I've asked you on the podcast?
Yeah, of course. So first of all, Stuart, thanks very much for having me. Like I say, so I'm Mark Stanton. I'm currently a culture and leadership consultant, but prior to that, I've spent 30 years in the police service. I retired a couple of years ago. It's always nice to say you've retired because I'm still relatively young, but I retired a couple of years ago. I made the rank of Chief Superintendent. I think for most people, if they watch Line of Duty, probably the easiest thing to say is if you remember who Hastings was, then I was Hastings' boss. And that sort of helps people understand, the level of seniority. But if you were to look at it from the top of the organisation, you have one chief constable and a deputy, a number of assistant chief constables, and then there were around 11 chief superintendents that sat underneath in Merseyside. So, and I was one of those. The areas of responsibility I had when I finished was I was head of what we called specialist operations, so matrix. That was things like armed policing, roads policing, disruption teams, as well as the force planning teams and the contingency planners. So the people who, in the event of major events, or think of the football matches that are being done and things like that, the people that would organise those types of events, and the big things like the Parade of the Giants, that was the teams of people that worked within the departments that I was responsible for. So broad portfolio. And prior to that, I spent time doing business change, helped the force do one of its biggest reorganisations in its history around 2017 time. I've been the head of the emergency contact centre, so looked after all the call handlers and the dispatchers that send officers out. And really just spent time on a leadership journey over 30 years to gather various bits of experience, both in the job and with the public as well.
Yeah, and you know what, I've said this several times, and obviously the audience know that I really pick the people I want to speak to, and every time I have people like yourself on, I think I've got 20 minutes, I've got 20 minutes, I've got 20 minutes. How do I fit this in? So let's start. So obviously we're hashtag leadership, what's on your mind? Just in simple terms, what comes to your mind when you hear the word leadership?
So I think for me, it starts with self. The leadership of yourself is the most important thing, because unless you get an understanding of who you are and what makes you tick and what makes you drive, and where your own sort of limiting beliefs are, your barriers to progress, how can you then step out and go and help somebody else and support them on their journey? So that's where leadership starts with me. Is it starts with that inward reflection of who am I, what have I got to offer, how does this relate to the environment and the world in which I'm in, and where I am at this moment in time.
I like that. Again, it amazes me how many people don't think about that, because again, the tag of leadership is almost always put on others, which is a massive element, as we know. But I really like the fact that we've got lots of people coming on saying about the actual driver. It starts with me before then I can affect others. So I like that. So staying with you personally, I love how far people go back on this. So let's see how far we can go back. So where do you think your leadership journey started? So whether it's on reflection, now I'm asking you about it, or was there a light bulb moment at the time? Like, how far back can we go to the start of your journey?
Right, I thought about this because I thought this is going to be one of your questions that will come up. So I have done a little bit of reflection, and it was do you know what really got me was that as I started thinking, I was going, oh yeah, it was at that stage, it was that course in the police, and then I went, no, it wasn't, it was before then, and then it was before then. And I've wound up, the place that I've ended up saying is at the school structure that we had back then. I wouldn't be able to say what year I was in. I think it would be the equivalent of year 7 now, but year 7, year 8. But we had a system of house captains. You know, I wasn't at a private school or anything like that. It was just within the school year we had houses, and you had house captains. And I put myself forward to be the house captain. And as a kid, without going into, we've got 20 minutes, without going into my childhood, I had quite a strange childhood. I was sort of quite restricted in what the freedoms that I had, that I was allowed to do by my parents or not do. So consequently, I didn't have a massive friends group. But what I did have within school was that I was popular on the basis, I think, that I was sort of like, I was pretty kind to everybody that I sort of met, because like being at school for me was my outlet to be able to be, you know, to get to see people, because post getting home from school, we weren't really allowed out that much. So, but it was there that I put myself forward to be the house captain, and I went on holiday, and the vote was done while I was away. And I stopped and saw my mate. I waited for my mate after school, after my holiday, and I said, who won the vote? And he goes, well, why are you even asking? And I went, have I won? And he went, of course you have. And I think, you know, the first time that anybody sort of said, I wouldn't have known it as leadership then, and I wouldn't have known it even as popularity or anything like that. I just think that if I go back to the very first time that I thought other people have confidence in me or put trust in me or want me to do something for a reason, that bizarrely is it.
I love that though, because that links to you saying about self-leadership when you said about what comes to your mind. And again, that kind of being that, again, it goes full circle forwards to how important people skills are, and just the simplicity of being nice to people and being interested and invested in other people. Just like we say to our kids, say hi to everybody. Say hi to everybody at school. You don't necessarily need to be best friends with everybody, but say hi and be personal with people. And it has a big impact. They go through the playground and they're saying hi to everybody in different years as well, which I think is really impactful.
It's lovely. And do you know, the thing is that I spent a lot of time as you get older. My wife and I often have this conversation, is that in school, you're not really taught, you don't have lessons on emotional intelligence or emotional awareness or social awareness, etc., specifically, and how to develop yourself and how to develop those skills around leadership potential and things like that. And it would be nice if that was done. But I've spent an awful lot of time after, as I've grown up, reading books to learn, observing what other people do who are in leadership positions. And then, you know, somebody said to me, or you pick out the good bits that you like from other people that fit and resonate with you. And then you realize that that's a values-based thing, that's based on moral, you know, moral sort of consistency and comparisons between you. But you learn new concepts, and then, you know, stepping out and trying them out is something that you get the opportunity to be able to do in a work environment. You get to have a play with it and see if it works. And if it does work, right, then that becomes part of my leadership style. And if it isn't, then you go, blimey, that was a car crash. I'm not going to, you know, I'm not going to do that one again. And I think that self-development and that personal leadership is really key. You know, you can't create yourself from a book and go, oh, well, I do this and this is my model, because that book's been written by somebody who was that model. Yeah. And what we have to look at from the outside is, how do I take little pieces that work, that align with my values and align with the person that I am, and then convert that into the style of leadership that I want to undertake. And I mean, you know, in policing, it was full of, I saw some really, really good leaders, and I saw people that I thought, you know, I don't get how you've got to be a leader. And the other bit that I would say, if I may, is that it's like one of the challenges that you often get is that people who become technically competent at the job that they're doing, so they become an expert in their field at, they might, in my case, they may be an outstanding, police officer, they may be an outstanding roads police officer, all the rest of it. Absolutely brilliant, really, really good at what you're doing. But what are the leadership skills that you've got that sit alongside that go, right, okay, if we promoted you purely on technical ability, well, how are you going to take people with you? How are you going to get them involved in what you're doing? Because that's the bit where the skill element is one part, but it's that, right, you've now got to detach yourself from your ability to do that, but at the same time, give people the confidence that you know and have an understanding of what their job is and how you can inspire them to do what they want to do and do more.
Yeah, I love that. There's so many things that resonate with what you just said then. I've said a couple of times on the podcast about we've got to take leadership off the page. You said about the models, like make it your own, pick and choose. I like that philosophy. And the kind of like, it just came to my mind when you're saying about capacity and capability. It's almost like jack of all trades, master of none is actually better in regards to the better foundation of leading people, because you've got a bit of an understanding, but you're not an expert. I think people that fit into the expert field then really struggle to transition to bring others along on the journey as well. Don't know whether you agree with that.
Yeah, I do. And I think one of the other things for me is that as a leader, what you've got to have is the humility to be able to admit that you don't know. The department that I had, if you look at it, you go, right, armed policing, roads policing, big disruption teams, vehicle crime teams, planning teams, contingencies. There are so many specialisms within there. It was impossible for me to know the intricacies of all of those particular teams and how they operated. And the staff that were on the ground are the people, in my view, that have the clearest understanding of what their job is, how it could be done, and in many cases, how it could be done better, and what the barriers are to stopping them doing what we've tasked them to be able to do. And I've seen it where you have too many leaders, and I would say probably not leaders, they're more managers, but people who are not prepared to go, well, I don't know the answer to this. And they fall at the fact that they don't want to admit in front of the people that they're leading, I really don't know this. And my style was, I was quite happy to admit that I didn't know. It took a long while to get there, but when I got there, I realized if I say to people here, right, okay, I'm thinking 1, 2, 3 things, and they would say, yeah, okay, boss, that's great, but what about X, Y, and Z? Right, okay, yeah, we need to do that then. What do you suggest? And what you start doing and what you're able to do is to start empowering people to be able to step up and do what they are capable of doing. There was a guy who was one of my bosses, and I steal this now with a bit of pride, because I heard him say it and I thought, God, that's absolutely true. So obviously in policing we wore insignia on our shoulders. And I overheard him the one day say to somebody that all that his insignia gave him was the ability to make a different type of decision. So it didn't give him moral authority over somebody. It didn't give him autonomy to make the only decisions. It didn't give him the power to have the best decisions. It gave him a standard in the organization that he could make a different level of decision to what I could. And I think when you see that that's what you've got, then you start appreciating that the people around you are equally, and if not more, capable of making decisions than you are. They've got better levels of knowledge and they know how to do that. And if I give you a quick story on that.
Yeah, go for it.
So in 2011, you may recall there was a series of outbreaks of riots across the country. There was a bit of a summer of discontent in the August of that year. And eventually it moved from London as a result of the shooting of an unarmed black guy by the police. And then it sort of spread city by city. And eventually it came to Liverpool. It came to Liverpool a couple of days afterwards. And I went into work that first morning that we'd had the riots on the evening, and then we were sat around discussing with chief officers what's going to happen here, what's going to be the plan, who are we going to have in command or in the command roles later on during the day. And just to give you a very quick overview, they have a gold, silver and bronze structure. So the gold commander's the big boss, the strategic boss that looks after the plan and makes sure we're going to achieve some outcomes. Silver's are tactical commanders. They put plans in place that help deliver that strategy, and the operational commanders are the people on the ground that are taking the staff with them and implementing various tactics. And I volunteered that day to be a bronze commander, and as a result of it, it meant going home, spending the day at home in the end, and then coming back in the evening to be able to work a late shift and a night shift. So I'd worked about 3 or 4 hours by the time I'd gone home, and then I came back in. And I was given around about 140 officers. We had a bit of a directive not to allow the riots to spread into residential areas or the disruption to get into the city centre. We didn't want the city centre to be looted and property to be damaged and people injured, etc. And I got out onto the streets, and very quickly you could see the hostility that was coming in towards the police. And I was with an officer who's called the tactical advisor. And the tactical advisor, at the time, I was a chief inspector, and the tactical advisor is a constable. So you've got constable, sergeant, inspector, chief inspector. Yeah. But the person who is the specialist in delivering the tactics is the tactical advisor. And I, as the commander, could lean into them and say, right, I'm thinking of doing this. I want to move this group that way. And the tactical advisor's job is to say, right, okay, have you thought about, well, what happens if they go into the residential areas? What happens if they build barricades? What happens if they decide to do a runner, etc.? And when I got out on the streets, we'd had our car had been hit with a golf club that we were in. Somebody had golf clubbed the side of the car. You know, barricades were starting to being blocked. We were getting reports of police vans being attacked and staff having to get their shields out earlier than what I'd hoped. And I remember getting out onto the main road that we were on, and I looked at my attack advisor, and you know, you talk about when does your leadership get challenged, and properly that day, my leadership and my own personal ability, I felt, was really under the cosh and under pressure. And I looked at the attack advisor and I went, how on earth are we going to resolve this? What's going to be the trigger that gets them to go home and brings this down? And he just looked at me and he said, boss, we do it step by step, piece by piece, and eventually they'll get bored and they'll get tired and they'll want to go home. And he went, and all we do is make sure that we all get everybody home as well. And that for me was, one, it was reassuring, but it also, as I reflect a lot back on that event, sort of said, yeah, I was the commander, if you like, for that particular designated area, but actually the person that had the knowledge to challenge what I wanted to do and to help get us there was a person that organizationally was 4 ranks below me. So it wasn't just about my skill, it was about his skill and our combined thinking, and me as the senior leader having the humility to be able to go, I need your advice here. And that's what I think policing is really good at when we have those major events where you get a tactical advisor, is that person is the conscience that you, and is the gap filler for everything that you're trying to process.
Do you know what? I love that. And again, we are nearly out of time. I'm just going to pause that there because, but I like that because that's such a takeaway for the audience listening. Because just saying, who's your tactical advisor in your leadership journey? You can have you can have a conversation with you. You can see them, know them. You can actually go, you are my tactical advisor. You don't have to do that. You can just have people around you who you know are good at questioning. and putting you under that kind of, they're just making me think. And then as a business, we're doing that for clients, as coaches, as facilitators in the room, and creating environments where you have those stop moments, those light bulb moments of, and I love this saying when we get people go, I've not thought like that before. That's my aim, to get people to go, I've not thought about that. That's interesting. And I think people will be thinking of that now, listening to your story. So, yeah, that's brilliant. Amazing.
It's who do you know, like, and trust, and who can you get around you that's going to give you honest feedback and challenge, and is going to be within that group of people that won't just tell you the grass is green and the roses are red type thing. They're going to tell you the absolute truth of what you've got, and as a leader, you've got a responsibility to listen and take on that advice.
Yeah, amazing, Mark. That's brilliant. That's the end of the podcast already. I've got a feeling we're going to continue conversations, and in the future there's going to be some opportunities to hear you talk next year as well. So, Mark, thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you for you. Like I said,
yeah, ladies and gents, if you really enjoyed that, I say this every week, please let us know your takeaways and how you can relate to some of the things that Mark talked about, and some of the things that we kind of resonated with, and some of the things you can take away and implement. And obviously every Wednesday at 6 a.m. we have amazing people coming your way. We are getting to the end of the year now, so look out for some announcements for next year. And if you haven't already, make sure you hit subscribe on the YouTube channel and you follow us on your podcast provider. Mark, have a great weekend, and I'll see you very soon. And ladies and gents, I'll see you all next week. Take care. Bye.